Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is Technique Tuesday. So I'm going to go through some demonstrations of the lifted increase. Then I'm going to show you some ways that this increase can be used that can't be done using other increases. Then we're going to talk about the lean of these increases, which way they lean, and how to use them effectively in projects, and some advantages and disadvantages. So let's get started. So I'm going to start with a right lifted increase. I'm going to work this first stitch. So a right lifted increase is done using the right leg of the stitch that's immediately below the needle. So we have the live stitch on the needle, and then we have a completed stitch that's under the needle. You're going to lift that right leg up onto the needle, like so. And then you are going to knit it like a regular stitch. So that's your increase. You're not going to let this one come off the needle just yet. You're going to work that stitch. Otherwise you wouldn't end up with an increase. So now we work that stitch. So now we have 3 stitches where we used to have 2. So I'm going to work another stitch and I'll show you that again. So you lift the right leg of that stitch that's below the needle, and you put it on the needle. So you've got tip to tip facing each other. When I'm putting it on there, I knit it through the front just like a regular stitch. I've got my thumb on the existing stitch that was there before, just so it doesn't slide off the needle. And now I'm going to knit that original stitch. So there's another way to do this, which is to knit through the purl bump on the back of the fabric, and sometimes that's how patterns will instruct you to knit this. So you can come through that stitch, just have this lean toward you and put the needle through there and then just knit it. You can do that. I find that a little trickier. Some people are going to find it easier. And if you'll notice, if you lift that leg, like I was showing you before on the needle, that is the same thing. This leg on the back side is the purl bump. So either way works. It's exactly the same thing. So you choose which way works best for you when you are doing the right lifted increase. The left lifted increase is done in a stitch below the right hand needle, and it's done 2 rows below instead of in the row right below the needle. It's done in this one. And the reason for that is if we take this stitch out right now, so the stitch that is currently on the needle, when I knit that, it comes off the needle and ends up under the needle. So if we are using right lifted increases and left lifted increases in the same row, and we want those increases to appear in the same row of the fabric, we would do a left lifted increase 2 rows below, because the stitch that's 2 rows below is the same row as the one that's right below that needle. So I'm going to look at the stitch that's 2 rows below, and I'm going to lift that left leg. And you see when I lift it, if you look at the leading leg of that stitch, so the leg that is closest to the tip is hanging over the back. So we want to knit this so that we are pushing against that leading leg so that this stitch does not twist. We want it to be a regular stitch. So the leading leg, if it's over the back, then we knit through the back so that we're pushing against that leading leg. And then it comes off the needle, and now we've got 3 stitches where we had 2. So we'll do that again. So I've knit the stitch, and it is on the right hand needle, and I need to go 2 rows below to lift that leg up. And I work it so that I'm pushing against that leading leg. So it's going you can say that's going through the back of the stitch, but we want to go that way so that it does not twist and it stays open. It's already going to look twisted when you have those 2 stitches, as there's already going to look like there's a twist in it. So if you want to do the purl bump method, you would use your left hand needle to lift up that purl bump. And I've got my yarn in the way, so I need to get that yarn out of the way in order to get at that purl bump, in order to lift it on the needle so that I can now get my yarn back to the back, and then I can knit it. So do whichever one works best for you. I think in this case, the left lifted increase is easier to do just by lifting that leg when you're doing it in a knit stitch. You can also do lifted increases in purl fabric, and you could do a purl increase or a knit increase, either one. So that purl bump is right there if I'm going to do a right lifted increase. If I wanted to knit into that one, if I wanted to do a knit increase into that purl bump, I could just put my needle underneath there. It can either put it on the needle first and then pull the yarn through. That's one way to do it. And then I could do my purl bump. Or if I was actually going to purl through this, I would lift it up onto the needle. And then again, you see that leading leg is hanging over the back. So you're going to purl through that leading leg. Like that. So you can do a knit stitch or a purl stitch into any of these lifted increases. Now let's look at a left lifted purl increase. So we're looking for the purl bump that is 2 rows below the needle. Going to lift that up. And then if we want it to be a knit stitch, we can knit it. If we want it to be a purl stitch, we move the yarn to the front in order to purl it. So it's pretty simple. It's pretty easy to get these purl bumps onto the needle. They're pretty easy to see. But it's the first one under the needle if you're doing a lifted or a right to lifted increase, and it's the purl bump 2 rows below if you're doing a left lifted purl increase. So one of the nice things about lifted increases is that you can do them side by side. You can have 2 lifted increases that are right next to each other on the needle, and you do not get a big hole at the base of them like you would if you did 2 make 1 increases right next to each other. So the way that you would do that is that you would do a left lifted increase on one side, and then you would do a right lifted increase on the other. If I'm going to do a left lifted increase first, I'm going to look at that purl bump 2 rows below, lift that, and then I can do a knit or a purl here with whichever. I'm going to actually do a knit here, and I'll show you why in a second. So now I want to do the next one. I'm going to lift up that purl bump, and I'm just going to knit it right now. So I've got my side-by-side increases, and then I can continue purling for the rest of the row. So one reason I might do side-by-side increases is if I'm doing cables from a book like this, these Viking patterns for knitting, where you are starting with a background of purl stitches and then you're creating your cables somewhere in the fabric. And you do that with increases, and you're doing it in 2 sets of these side-by-side increases. So what I did first as I was working across the purl, I did side-by-side lifted increases that were knit increases. Then I worked a wrong side row, knitting the knits and purling the purls. And then when I came across here, I did another set of lifted increases in those knit stitches that I created. So now I have 4 knit stitches, and then I can start after that moving these cables across the fabric and crossing them when I want. One of the things that I have found surprising about the lifted increase, and sometimes confusing because I have to usually think about what I'm going to be doing and what result I want, is that the stitch that is the increase, the one that you are creating, ends up looking like it is the stitch that was established before. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's work this third stitch right here. And now let's do a lifted left increase. So I have to come 2 stitches below the needle, lift that on, and now I'm going to knit it. So this is the increase. That's the increased stitch, and that's the established stitch. And if you look under the needle, it looks a little different. This one that was there to begin with looks like it's actually coming off to the right. It almost looks like it's the new stitch and not the increased stitch. And that, in fact, what it looks like in the fabric. So here is a swatch where I have right lifted increases over here and left lifted increases here. So I have 3 stitches from the edge, and then I have the increased stitch is the 4th stitch. But if you look along here, even though this is the increased stitch every time, it looks like that is the one that is maintaining the original column, and that the other ones are the ones that are coming out from here and creating the new columns. So that's something to keep in mind. The right lifted increase may not be the increase that looks like it is leaning to the right. And the left lifted increase may not be the increase that looks like it's leaning to the left, because the stitch that's actually increasing looks like it's maintaining, and the previous stitch looks like it's the increase. So this looks like this is an increase that's leaning to the right, even though I did a left leaning increase. So when you understand that, first of all, when you want to use these in a particular situation, you might want to swatch, or even do a swatch that with references on them, so that you, and tag them so that you can remember what they look like in certain situations. But here is an example. This is a top-down hat that I knit where I used lifted increases. And what I was doing was, when I had just a few stitches, I knit 2, and then I did a left lifted increase. And then I worked a plain round, and then I knit 3 and did a left lifted increase. So it's always doing the increase at the end of the section. And that's what this kind of longer strand is right here, is when I do it like that, you get this sort of double length looking leg that's in a consistent location, and it looks like everything else is what's growing out of this consistent column of stitches. But it looks nicer than if I were to do a right leaning increase instead at this edge every time, or a right lifted increase, I should say. The left lifted one looks better at this edge than if I was doing a right lifted one. And you'd think that the right lifted one is the one that would, look like it was creating these new columns. The other nice thing about using the increases in this way is that when you're looking at it as it's worn, that long leg that you see there, there's like one leg right here, and you see 2 stitches right here. You're looking at these stitches upside down, but it looks like you have a full right side up stitch here, and that's just an illusion. It's a half of the lifted increase, and then a half of the other stitch that's actually there. So the real stitch is this V right here, and this is the leg of the left leg of that lifted increase. But when you look at it in this direction, it looks like it's functioning as a decrease, and you see that full stitch. So it's worth experimenting with these to see what sort of result you like, and where you want to place your increases, and experimenting with them to get the kind of results that you like. So I've talked a little bit about some of the advantages of the lifted increase, like how nice it looks when it's upside down in this situation. It looks like you've got a line of regular decreases. You can do side-by-side increases, so you can, without getting holes in the fabric. It's pretty invisible in the fabric, in stockinette fabric. So those are all advantages, but the disadvantage might be if you were doing textured fabric and you needed to do increases. Lifting a leg below the needle or 2 rows below the needle and then working into it could be real disruptive of a textured stitch pattern. And it would be disruptive in color work as well. If you're doing stranded color work, it probably wouldn't be a good choice for that either, unless you're doing it in a solid part of the color work pattern. So in those situations, then it's a good idea to choose a different type of increase, like a make one increase, which just appears between 2 existing columns of stitches and doesn't interfere with anything that's already existing in the fabric. I recently did a deep dive into knit front back and make one increases, and if you'd like to see that video, you can find it over here. I also have a playlist of all of my increasing and decreasing videos, which you can find down here. If you have any comments or questions about today's video, you can leave those down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.